Hello everyone, welcome back. Thank you for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be speaking about 5 ETFs for monthly income. I'm not going to say that these are necessarily the best ETFs for monthly income, but they are some of the most popular ETFs. I hold one of them currently, that is the SPHD, the Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF. So if you're looking for an ETF that will pay monthly income, this is a good video for you. And if you like content like this, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It will be greatly appreciated. So first up is the Invesco S&P 500 High Dividend Low Volatility ETF. It currently has a yield of about 4.6%. And we can see on the right side here the payment date, the frequency of the payment. So it pays around the end of the week of every single month consistently. Now, the way the fund operates is a very simple strategy. It takes the top 50 dividend yielding companies within the S&P 500 and screens them for low volatility, and it comprises the ETF. It's a very simple strategy. It just picks, again, the highest dividend companies and also the lowest volatility ones, and it makes up this ETF. So it has 50 holdings, and we can see these top holdings here. So we have Altria and AT&T, Verizon. Some of these are well known, others not so much. They are pretty much all well established, and they do all pay high dividends. Altria currently has a yield of about 8.3%, and AT&T currently has a yield of about 7.7%. So as we could see, all of these companies are high yielding, and it is probably the simplest strategy aside from maybe the other ETF that I'm going to speak about next. But it is a very simple strategy. Again, takes the top 50 yielding companies within the S&P 500, further screens them for volatility, and it just makes this ETF. So overall, this ETF is a great ETF for people that like a simple strategy and want consistent monthly dividend income. And to date, I currently have about 9,400 invested in it. So the next ETF is going to be the SPDR Dow Jones Industrial Average ETF. And like the last one, this ETF has a very simple strategy, probably even simpler. It's designed to simply track the performance of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's comprised of 30 blue chip stocks. Now, unlike the other ETFs that are in this video, this one actually has a somewhat low yield here, under 2%, and that is likely because it is designed to track the index of Dow Jones, and a lot of those stocks that it is comprised of don't really pay high dividends. So you could see to the left how the fund is comprised, and then on the right how the index itself is comprised, and it tracks the index very well. And you could see that all these companies on the left are quality companies, and like the fund states, it tracks 30 blue chip stocks. So you're going to have higher weightings and quite a bit less diversity, but you are still going to be pretty much diverse across this index. So if you want to make it your own only holding, it probably isn't going to be too bad. And to the right, you could see that the ETF basically pays the second week of every single month consistently. So again, another consistent ETF that is well diversified, and you won't really have to worry too much about the diversification or about this, as it is passively managed. Now, these next ETFs operate on a different strategy. They operate more on a covered call strategy, but they do offer dividends through their underlying holdings. So this is a popular ETF here, JEPI, or the JP Morgan Equity Premium Income ETF. The fund itself has a very high yield. It currently pays about 10.5%. So it is one of the higher yielding ETFs that are in this video. And again, to the right side, you can kind of see that this ETF pays at the beginning of pretty much every month, the first week. And the way the fund operates is that the investment team basically selects US large cap stocks that have low volatility and that also pay dividends. And then they use a strategy that sells covered calls on the S&P 500 that generates higher income. And now this isn't a traditional covered call ETF. This is more of an equity linked notes. It's more of a debt obligation that they receive their income from. But it's basically a moot point. Just remember that it is not exactly like covered calls. It's slightly different, but essentially for all differences, it is almost the same. And this ETF, of course, also has quality holdings. The top 10 are all pretty well known. We have Pepsi, Visa, Comcast, Adobe, Amazon, Microsoft, MasterCard. These companies are well known and have a history of low volatility. So the underlying assets will grow over time as well, and you will also be receiving income from their equity-linked notes that operate similar to a covered call strategy. Next one up is XYLG, or the Global X S&P 500 Covered Call and Growth ETF. It currently has a yield of about 3.4% here. And this ETF has a payment date around the very end of the month or the very beginning of the month. And this ETF kind of also has a very simple strategy. It basically sells covered calls on the S&P 500, but only 50% of them, 50% of the underlying. So it's not writing covered calls on the total underlying holdings that it has. It's only writing covered calls on half of them, and that is to allow for growth over time. Unlike ETFs like QYLD or XYLD, that's why I chose XYLG instead of XYLD, which is the total index that it sells covered calls on instead of just half of it. Like, this is its counter. This is the Global X S&P 500 covered call, so it doesn't have growth in its name, as you probably noticed. It offers a higher yield, but it allows for a lot less growth because it's selling covered calls on the entire basket of equities that it has. So it's selling it on its entire portfolio, unlike XYLG, which is only doing half, and that allows for better growth. Now, as this fund operates, its holding structure is very simple because it corresponds with the S&P 500. So you're going to see all the holdings in the S&P 500 here in this ETF too. So it's kind of easy to understand. It's simply, again, the S&P 500 with covered calls written on half of the value. So it's not selling contracts again on the entire underlying holdings that it has. It's just half. And the final monthly dividend paying ETF is the Amplified CWP Enhanced Dividend Income ETF. Currently has a yield of about 4.7%. And the ETF consistently pays around the end of the month. It looks like the last day of every single month. So if you really need very consistent payment on a singular date, this ETF may be the best one because it has the most consistent payment. Just think the last day of every single month. So this ETF is kind of a similar strategy to JEPI. It's an actively managed ETF that invests in high-quality large-cap companies with a history of dividend growth and then tactically sells covered calls on the individual stocks that it holds. So very similar in operation to JEPI, but I don't think this ETF, unlike JEPI, uses equity-linked notes. I think it just uses the covered call strategy. I think it just simply writes covered calls on those stocks and doesn't use any sort of debt obligation like an equity-linked note. And its top holdings are all well known and very well established. So again, very good diversified holdings overall, and it operates similar to JEPI. One thing to note about all of these monthly payers is that basically they all do have higher expense ratios. It does seem that for the convenience and the way these portfolios are structured, some are actively managed, you will be looking to pay higher expense ratios for the convenience and for the fact that they're actively managed, some of them at least. So this is the expense ratio of JEPI, about 0.35. DIVO's at about 0.55, SPHD is at 0.3, XYLG is at 0.6, and DIA, probably because it has one of the more conventional strategies and it is more passively managed, it only has an expense ratio of 0.16. And in fact, if you're a growth investor, DIA may be the best ETF for you because it doesn't simply focus on high-yielding stocks or high-yielding income strategies. Unlike the other, it just tracks the Dow Jones and also pays monthly from that index tracking. Now, probably what everybody wants to know is how can I get $1,000 a month from these ETFs? That seems to be a common goal for a lot of people. So I did the calculation for you. And as of the date yesterday, this is the calculation that I did and the capital needed and the shares required. So SPHD, you would need about $270,000 for $1,000 a month. With JEPI, you would only need about $154,000. With DIVO, $255,000. With XYLG, $254,000. And with DIA, of course, because it is the lowest yielding ETF of them all, you would need $445,000. So if you need just the highest income, of course, JEPI would be the winner here with the least amount of capital needed to make $1,000 a month. You would need about 2,783 shares to get that goal. So that's going to be it for today's video. It was kind of compact, but I know speaking about 5 ETFs in one video, if I was to deeply explain each one, it would take forever, and the video may just become too long, and people may become disinterested. So I kind of wanted to basically stick to the foundation and describe the basics of all of these ETFs in the simplest fashion possible. And I want to thank you all for watching. And again, if you do enjoy this content, consider subscribing. It will be greatly appreciated. And everyone, have a great day.